at the moment, nothing serious. But
yeah, that's very cool though. All right.
got it.
So I think we're going out here. The stream's going out. Just make sure that I see that. Okay. Looking promising. There you go. Okay. So we're going out live on YouTube and Facebook and whatnot. And now it's time to let people in. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Piano Tech Radio Hour. It's a pleasure to have you here, as always. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a very special guest today, which I will introduce in a moment, who I think will have some very special things to share with us as well. And let me just make sure we're letting all the stragglers in here, let everybody in. And I'll just wait a minute or two while people are jumping in. Looks pretty good. Okay, let's intro, and I'll just continue to let people in. So welcome to Piano Tech Radio Hour, which is this very special program we have every Saturday here, and we bring in interesting and intelligent and expert folks from the piano industry, be they piano technicians, who are doing rebuilding or tuning or voicing or all sorts of repairs or whatever they're into, as well as other types of professionals in pianos, all the way from piano store owners to musicians, and people who are working, for various organizations within the piano industry. And this is brought to you by Piano Technicians Masterclasses, which brings you an online educational resource that offers you cutting-edge instruction from piano industry masters without leaving your home. You could find out more about that at www.pianotechniciansmasterclass.com. And now what I'll do is give an intro to our guest today. And his name is Johan Krebs. You may know him as a regular attendee to Piano Tech Radio Hour, and we're finally getting a chance to let him speak up and share some of his wisdom with us. And he's been putting together some very interesting concepts about how to approach the piano and optimizing its performance. And from what he said, it's been something that's been evolving, over the weeks, months, and years as of late, and we're really happy to hear about it. I'll give an intro of him so you just get a sense of his background, and that goes a little bit like this. With a background in laboratory technology and in clinical music therapy, Johann was introduced to piano building, rebuilding, and tuning at the Music University of Vienna, Austria, and by working in two factories, Brugger and Erbar, where Anton Petrov learned piano building 100 years ago. And Karl Rib, the owner of Erhab, was the head examiner for Austria for piano builders, who was very generous with his knowledge and who challenged Johann to no end. And Dieter Bergauer taught him the trade from the ground up, including bass string winding and forte piano restoration. 50 years later, and having worked for 30 years at universities as a staff technician, much has been learned about the importance of specifically piano sound from faculty, visiting artists, and recording engineers, and by doing tuning research to learn about the factors involved. And with all that, which is a great foundation for us to learn about Johann, I will introduce to you Johann. He has a presentation to share with us today, and we'll quickly get into that as well. So welcome, Johann. Great to have you.
Well, thank you, Ethan. And it's great to be with you all, spend an hour with you all. I'd like to start out by saying something we do here in British Columbia, in Canada. I live on the territory of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations. And since BC never has made treaties, this is still their land. And I'm privileged to be able to live here, work here, and speak from their territories.
Thank you for that.
The topic today is as much about the future of the piano as it is about pianos and piano servicing. In particular, the common piano in people's homes, because that's, for most of us, our mainstay of work. But it applies just as much to pianos in music studios, universities, concert halls, and so on. Yeah, even if the piano is only used for enjoyment, it still makes a big difference to play a piano that is completely set up. And that's what we're talking about. What does it mean for a piano to be completely set up? I'm afraid I never learned to do that when I was younger. It took me 30 years to figure that out completely. And that's what I'm sharing with you. I'm also a member of the Southwest BC chapter in BC, and we've talked about things like the future of the piano. So this may be very timely to be talking about this. I'm going to switch to my presentation, which is called Integrative Piano Tuning, and you'll learn as we go why that name was chosen. So let's start.
Looking good.
I'll go to full view. So, okay, I hope that looks good for everybody.
Looks great.
Well, a happy piano makes everybody happy, not only the owner, but us, the tuners, as well. And I think that's very important if you want to stay with the work. I am, over the 50 years that I've been working, have reached several plateaus where I really doubted, should I keep on doing this? But then I discovered a new element in the aspect of piano tuning, and I stuck with it, and I'm so glad I did. But that happened probably 3-4 times because I can do other things. I can go back into chemistry, I can go back into music therapy, go back into college teaching. I've done all those things. But I would say all the experiences together have probably made me what I am today. Without that, and especially meeting all the people along the line, I would never have been able to bring it all to fruition. So here we go. Integrative piano tuning. And the interesting thing is, we're not so much focused on tuning pitch. We're focused on something else, the sound of the piano. So building the harmonic architecture of the piano is the main goal of what I see is the work of the piano technician. And we do that by utilizing the resonance in the instrument, bring that back or bring it out, the timbre, the sustain, the intensity, you can call it focus of the pitch, and then finally the pitch itself, which is basically part of the structure of the instrument. It's a given. Of course, it needs to be maintained like all the other things, but it's not in exactly that what we make music with. We make music with the tone of the piano. Bring out one note in a chord, bring out a melody, wherever in the range, and the expression, accentuations, phrasing, all that. That's what I'm focused on, and that's what I like to bring out in my tuning. As a result, my tunings are not 1 hour and a half, 2 hours. They're 4.5 to 6.5 hours. And of course, you need to be able to talk to your customer and prepare them over the phone beforehand. But I've had very, very little times where that was not accepted. In fact, people are extremely grateful. So it's done in 3 steps. In the first step, you can call it pre-tuning, pre-voicing. We build the pitch, we build the tone. In the second step, we do the actual tuning, what we might call the basic tuning, the regular tuning. And the third step involves fine-tuning the pitch, the voicing. But as you will learn later on, we don't do it in the traditional way because we don't need to deal with differences in soft sound, louder sounds, and try to even that out, because that's all taken care of in step number 1. And that's why I feel that this is a tuning that could actually be integrated more and more into our work into the future. And it opens new possibilities for the tuner, for the owner of the instrument, and for all musicians, concert goers, you name it, even recording. If you ever were to do this, you'll see that the recording quality improves. Sorry, I'm back. So the tuning is built from the ground up. You remember in the introduction, Dieter Bergauer of the Bergauer factory, which used to be called the first cooperative of piano builders between or of Pest and Vienna. Pest is Budapest in Hungary. It was all the German Reich, if you may remember. And in the Depression years, in the 30s, the piano makers simply couldn't make it. So they got together, even between these two cities, which are probably, I forgot, say 50 kilometers apart. And they formed cooperatives to purchase parts collectively and support each other that way. And that was the factory. And when he took over, he started using his own name. He built 10 pianos a year, 10 uprights, 2 grand pianos, did a tuning at 7 in the morning, tuning at 7 at night, and went home. So he had very little sleep, but he always slept between 1 and 2 o'clock. The business was closed. He pulled the bed out in the factory. And he, as the owner, lied in the middle of the factory, sleeping, and all basically saying, do the same thing to us. That's kind of cute. I was certainly not used to that. So, to us, the piano tuner, what is the big advantage? For one, and I think it is perhaps even the most important thing, that we get complete control over the outcome of the tuning from the first minute to the last minute. When we test the piano, play it perhaps if we can, let the owner play, let them try it out. So there's not one moment where we have no control over the outcome. And try to think about that. That's really quite important. Because normally, if we do a basic tuning, we end up having to voice. Yeah, where does that voicing go? We may not be able to resolve everything. Yeah, perhaps soft, loud notes, but not necessarily the character of each note. So then I say that most voicing problems are resolved in the pre-tuning phase. Then we get 2 levels of fine-tuning. That is our, call it step 2, regular tuning. But the voicing is going to be used for fine-tuning. When you do that kind of, call it voicing still, voicing for timbre and intensity, you can hear the pitch slightly going up in the hammer that you're just voicing. And if you're doing an octave, and say you have C4 and C5 to tune to each other. No, you have already tuned them. And you're going to fine tune them after you've done the string tuning. Then, first C4, do the timbre voicing. You hear the pitch go up. You hear that your octave has become narrower. Then you do the same to C5. And suddenly it's an octave again. So that's the last step of fine tuning that I'm introducing. And we can all use that to have a greater outcome and make the piano really shine. It gives old pianos a new lease on life. In my view, it's not necessary anymore to bring all these pianos to the dump. In fact, many of them might even be better than your average piano bought new from a store if you do this work. And much more rewarding too, often. So it brings out the full tonal beauty and range in new pianos, because we all know that about 10% of the stores on this continent really send out a new piano, fully set up, the way they can do it. The 90% usually don't do it, and that's sad, but it seems to be reality. So we end up doing it. So when I talk to a customer who's buying a piano, I often go with them, select a piano that I feel can be set up. It's not necessarily the so-called best sounding one in the store, because I listen for different things than most people do. I listen for the degree of sustain that the instrument has already and for the range that it produces. Whether I go to Steinway in Hamburg or New York or wherever in the local store, it doesn't matter. It's all the same thing. And then I prepare the customer that whatever they're going to pay in Canadian dollars, the conversion is 0.75, I think, people might expect to be adding around $800 to $1,200 to the to the purchase cost of the instrument to get it set up by me and are ready to go. In my view, musicians, people buying a piano in a store, 90% of the time they're not ready to go. Sad situation. So that's why I'm sharing. Even though it took me 30 years and I've been for such a long time totally hesitant in bringing this out. I wanted to keep it for myself. wanted to really be totally sure that I got it all, and I think I've reached that point. What are we looking for in a piano tone? I take the characteristics from the human voice, and I think it's exactly the same. The ideal sound of the piano that we're all striving for should be mellow, I think, yet have full vitality, be really strong in its center, in its core quality, not a hard edge, as we usually encounter. So a strongly centered pitch, and that pitch, when it is there, it's often referred to as a ping sound among musicians. When you play Mozart, for instance, you like the piano to have a ping sound, very clear, ringing, and totally transparent. So the sound must be unforced. The hammer, if it's too hard, forces the string to make a sound. So hard hammers are probably out, at least too hard hammers. So the sound must be unforced and generous, so that we have an open, long-sounding sustain and a very slow release, not a sudden drop-off of sound after the initial attack. Because if the attack is too strong, there's no energy left in the string to produce a tone. There's loss of energy. So that's a total imbalance. The tone is ideally such that you can hear it literally, I mean that, unfolding on the string. So you hear the sound building up on each note. It's fast, but you can hear it. So the sound begins to bloom. And then the resonance develops, the attack energy folds into the actual tone, the resonance, the sustain, and that's how the tone is formed. In the end, we want a totally clear sound and a transparent sound. Transparent means that the pitches are distinct, very defined, very clear, so that when you play different pitches, like a chord in the bass, you must be able to hear each individual note, and that's not always the case. It can be very muddy. But this process of tuning makes the sound stand out of each note, and then when you compose a chord, you can actually hear all those notes and the notes that the chord is made up on. We want a warm sound, especially in the middle, a rich sound, but also a dynamic sound, so a very broad range. And we want the sound to have color and nuance. I'll give a quick example. I came to a university once that had a deal with the Kawai factory, probably, company, and where Kawai gives the university new pianos every year and replaces them. In the meantime, uses the university grounds to sell all these pianos and others they bring in. So it's a good deal for the store, but I don't think good for the university, because there's never time to set up 100 pianos in that year, tune them, maintain, do all the tuning, concerts, you name it. It's impossible. So I think it's a bad deal for universities, but it saves money. So I came to this small Kawai, probably 41 inches, and I played C4, the middle C. I was not able to produce more than three levels of sound. Soft, I try so hard. Little louder, I could not get more than 3 levels. That same piano, after doing the integrative tuning, produced 8 to 10 levels on the same note. So you see that the tone not only becomes fuller, it becomes more variable at the same time. And I think that's something musicians really appreciate to do, the interpretation of the music, the phrasing, and so on. So piano sound is often, or the piano itself is characterized as a melodic, a harmonic, and a percussive instrument. Melodic, so we must have sustain the singing tone, good separation of voices to do polyphonic music, play Bach, 2, 3, 4 voices, fugues, and to keep all the voices separate. And that you can actually keep following the individual voices so that they don't disappear. We need that really clear separation and transparency. For the piano to become a harmonic instrument, there are 2 levels of harmony. Of course, there's the harmony from the intervals that we tune, setting the temperament, and we do that as good as possible, and we can really do a lot there. But there is inner harmony as well. The harmony produced by the fundamental on the string and all the overtones that are created when the string is excited. The percussive aspect I mentioned earlier, that the ping sound is so important, so that the attack is not too dominant, but that energy from the attack should go into the formation of the tone itself. What is a piano? Well, it's basically a box, a metal frame, strings, soundboard, resonator, hammers, mechanism. But the big issue is, are all these materials compatible with each other? Well, the answer is a big no. And that makes the piano probably the most unstable musical instrument in the world. And we as piano technicians are faced with that incredibly unstable instrument. And the instability causes the loss of tone. It's the reason that when the pitch changes and it goes out of tune, that we don't only hear that, but we hear a change in the sound, the harmonic structure of the strings, and that adds to the out of tune sound. So the task of the piano tuner, I think, in integrative tuning is to bring back the harmony in the sound first, then do the tuning, set the pitch, and then do your final adjustments for the timbre in the voicing. Why are these materials so incompatible? I'll go very quickly into that. When you have a car engine made out of aluminum, so an aluminum block, and you put it on a steel frame of the car, it's guaranteed to come loose. Aluminum and steel are not compatible. Look at the piano. We have brass A-graves in cast iron. Do you think that's compatible? No. Expansion rates are different. The A-graves will get loose no matter what. And of course, we have the problem that the factory, some even really good factories, don't always tighten them to begin with. So the piano already doesn't sound right. And then when you try to tighten them, you see that, yeah, they are not tight. I had one of these very famous brands once, and there were 17 A-graves not tight. I could turn them an eighth to a quarter turn with the string tension on. And I said, you know, this was a brand new piano. And I told the customer this. I am not able to bring the sound out in this very expensive piano. The reason is this. And I'm a little conflicted about it as well, because I was the person selecting that piano with them. And I asked in the store, can I check the tightness of the A-graves as I was checking it out? The answer was no. I could not do that in the store with the customer present. So the piano arrived at the home. It became a warranty issue. Well, warranty issues in my case can be sad. I lost the customer. I lost the connection with the store just because I brought up that problem. But at least I've not lost my own integrity. So we went through the three steps already. Sorry. I'm just going to pass that on. Here is something that's very important. There is a definition, a scientific definition of the concept of pitch. Pitch is not just a frequency that we tune when we do a basic tuning. Pitch is composed of timbre, the tone color, the harmonics if you want, the fundamental, the intensity, and finally the frequency, that's what we normally tune. The other two, however, must be included in order for the pitch to become truly a pitch. Otherwise we're not tuning pitch. We're tuning an approximation, a partial, an aspect of pitch, the frequency. And that's something I'm going to ask you to let sink in. And I look at myself, you know, I've been tuning probably for 20 years, 10 years, before I got into all these things. And I realized myself, I was selling my work as tuning, but now I'm realizing, well, I was selling partial tunings, but was not completely clear about it in my own mind and to the customer. And I always go into an explanation of everything, why I do what I do, by talking about the structural stability of the instrument, the way they are constructed, designed, and the role of the screws that hold all the parts together that also always get loose, and the necessity of having stability in the action, whether this is an upright action or a grand piano action, you all want it to be stable. The brackets, the keyframe, etc. All the screws. Yeah, so the criteria. Before we tune a single note, make sure all the screws are tight. We have complete stability. All the hitch pins are tight, and I'll bring it up now already, because hitch pins are made of a soft, malleable iron. The plate is a cast iron, a completely different material. That means that the hitch pins are not compatible with the plate. They will always get loose. Let that sink in. That's a big thing to consider, because I doubt whether any one of us, but you should let me know, has ever hammered in the hitch pins deeper than the way they come. And they should be hammered in up to the point where the curve starts, the bend. And as we will see later, I have some pictures where you can actually see me doing it. The bend can be too strong. The hitch pin, each one is hammered over in the factory by an individual, because when you look at it carefully, they're all bent over to a different degree. Some of the people have been a little bit too enthusiastic in the factory, and they've hammered them over too far, thinking that string will never come off, or I don't know why, but in any case, one cannot hammer in those hitch pins. That piano is a lost cause. Bring it back to the factory and tell them that you want another one where the hitch pins have been bent over perhaps 30 to 40 degrees from the vertical to the plate. Another important thing. So when you go with a customer to select a piano in the store, check that out. And don't buy a piano where the hitch pins are bent over too far, because you know that you will not be able to set up that instrument properly and will not have the result, and you will not have control over the outcome of the tuning. And I feel that your customer you're going with to the store should know this. And the store owner might be interested as well. So shortcuts do not exist. When you do all these steps, you're doing about 2,000 adjustments. It goes very quickly, bum, 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 bum. And then on top of that, the tuning. So probably 2,500 adjustments in the end. 225 tuning pins times 2. But if there is a budget about the piano tuning, yeah, you may have to make decisions. And then you want to be selective about which step to include in the pre-tuning section and which ones to leave out. I think the one that creates true tuning stability is probably the one to leave. And yeah, anyhow, that's a personal decision. I think that's an important one, because once you've done this big tuning and spent 6.5 hours on the work, that piano will stay in tune for 3 to 5 years. Not 3 weeks, not 3 months, not 1 year. It will go through the cycles with the seasons, but not as much as we're used to. Gradually, you will hear the tone change. So call that going out of tune, but the pitch is still there. Or just be within 2 to 4 or 5 cents after 5 years. So that's the amazing thing. If you do the work, look at the piano as a piano for what it is, a totally unstable instrument, bring back the stability and maintain it, it will stay in tune for that long a time. I see it over and over again, hundreds of pianos. And that way, the added cost can be spread over the years, and it's actually cheaper in the end than doing basic tuning, say every year or even more frequently. That is more expensive altogether than doing this non-expensive tuning where you have the much better tone and can make music on a higher level. So we need to be selective sometimes, just be realistic. I'm not against that, but I want to be clear. So start thinking. When you look at the piano and start looking at it the way I do now after all these years, I see immediately that some pianos are built where the access points that I need to service are not within reach, without turning over the upright piano, take the bottom off, for instance, or do other acrobatics, loosen strings, you name it. I'll leave that out, the tools needed. It's going to be too long otherwise. I just one short little story about the musical family came just from Iran, and the son who takes piano lessons greeted me at the door, and he was looking at me with big eyes, and he said, "I've opened up the piano for you and got it all ready. You can start right away." Now, that was quite something. I come to the piano, all the case parts beautifully laid out on the floor, and the piano exposed. But I got a shock, a big shock. He had removed the pressure bars just below the tuning pins. It was an upright Petrov. And all the strings were just hanging freely, loosely, dangling in the piano. And I was to tune, at least I thought. That's what I was hired to do. So, but, there's a big but. This is the first time for me that I was able to tighten the screws behind the pressure bar. And let's wait for a second. And you wouldn't believe it. Once I had it all done, so many tunings later, come back another day for stability of the tuning. That is probably the best tuning I've ever done, in this case a Petrov piano, because I was able to tighten the screws behind the pressure bar. And it is my view now that any factory that puts screws behind there and not above, below, from left to right, as some makes have done and perhaps still do, again, we lose part of the control over the outcome of the tuning, and the piano does not sound its best. And I thought, if this young man did this, just coming from Iran, do all the tuners in Iran take off the pressure bar, tighten the screws, put it back on, tune, come back another day? If they do, I take my hat off for them. So the principle is stability. We have a string. When is a piano string a string and not a loose wire in the piano, any piano? And that has to do with how the strings are mounted. So we are aware of the terminations, the mounting points. There are reflection points, duplex bars under the strings, for instance. And if anything is only a little bit loose, we will not have a string. It will be a loose wire. So very often, if we do not tighten everything beforehand, now looking back, I say to myself, I thought I was tuning, but I was tuning loose wires, not strings, because the characteristics did not come back by just going to the tuning pins. First, tighten everything. And this is a schematic drawing of a string with the damper, the resonator, in this case, a soundboard attached. Everything must be tight. That means the A graph must be totally tight, and you have to tighten it in the piano under tension. The hitch pin must be tight. The string must be seated around the hitch pin fully. And if you have a piano with like a Bluthner or whatever, with brass washers, shims under the string at the hitch pin, or a felt punching under the string like Bechstein's, for instance, do away with those things. The string sits too high on the hitch pin, it starts flagpoling, and you lose control again, and tone. I think it's only done for cosmetic reasons. I think these should be taken out, and I've done that many times to great gain. So the importance is have everything as solid as possible. If not, what happens? Say the hitch pin or the A graph is not solid, then the string, the defined string length is not the speaking length. It's the speaking length and an infinite length of the string. So now we have more than one fundamental, all mixed up, unrelated to each other. And that's why if one does not do this work, the harmonics, the overtones cannot set up properly on the fundamental. The fundamental will step back, be too weak, and not be the conductor, so to say, of the overtones, where they should be and how strongly they should sound. So we want a strong fundamental in the sound to have warmth, and for that we need strong terminations everywhere. And that's where the work goes. It takes about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours, depending on the piano, to do all that. So before the tuning. And that's where the time goes. But don't worry about it. I've done this so many times now, and say the owner of the house is upstairs doing some whatever in an office, and I hear suddenly a door opening upstairs, and a voice comes down, and the voice says, I can hear the sound of the piano improving as you go along. I can hear it all the way upstairs. And that is the confirmation that I'm on the right way, on the right path with their piano, and that I will have no problem collecting the money afterwards, even though I have prepared them in advance for an approximate figure, since I never know in advance what is all needed in the end. So when is a piano string a string and not a loose wire? I just covered that. We're tuning not pitches, but the harmonic architecture. We need a foundation for all the rest. The rest is just almost on the side. The architecture, that's the important thing we need to maintain. We need to make clear the concept of the stability. We talk about the expectations of doing all this work. And I brought this up already. Yeah, do you really seriously expect me to spend 4.5 to 6.5 hours on a tuning? What about all my other customers? But they will wait. I've had waiting lists of 3 months and more. People will wait, no problem. You get forever thankful customers. You will keep your own sanity too, because you're not always doing the same thing repetitively. There's so much variation in this work. And it points to the future, I think. If we start looking at the piano a little bit more than we do presently, what it really is, this unstable box with stuff inside that should become a musical instrument, we really need to think of it that way. And everybody will be very thankful in the end. And I've had professors, coaches, voice coaches, one actually, Margot Garrett from Juilliard, tell me that the pianos in Juilliard are not looked after this way. And in the 10 days that she was giving a master class, 7 times she and her students came up to me just to personally thank me for working on the piano that way. Because for the first time in their study and teaching, they have experienced a piano that actually supports the singer and allows the singer to have a full connection with the instrument and just not just keep their fingers crossed. It's very thankful work, very rewarding work. And I recommend that everywhere in the world, not only where you live, work groups, teams are formed of piano technicians to collectively start working on this concept, to make everybody benefit, and also to make it possible that you find ways of bringing it out to the public. Very quickly, Cristofori's first piano, no screws, beautiful. My first pianos learned on were Viennese actions, no screws in the action. What a beauty. Don't need to worry about these things, only plate screws. So the pianos always sounded good. Time of Beethoven, a little bit more evolved. Here I'm playing a beautiful upright. I have a recording, but I'm skipped that for time reasons. Oh no, there. But you heard the sound a little bit. Here's the Iranian Petrov piano. You can see the screws behind the pressure bar. And the bar was taken off, allowing me to tighten these screws. So important. I have ground down screwdrivers so I can go in between the strings without marring them. The side of the screwdriver is rounded off. I use a lever and I sort of really feel how tightly I can turn them. It depends on the wood, of course. But if it's a Steinway grand piano for the perimeter screws, you can go 15, perhaps even 20, what do you call it, inch pounds. And no, inch ounces, I suddenly forgot. It's foot pounds and inch ounces, right? So 11 to 20 to gauge the tightness of how tight you can make them on the plate. Do not skip any screws on the plate, the bottom of the piano, wherever there are screws. Bottom soundboard, buttons, screws, wherever you find screws, you tighten them. And at every level of tightening, do a little bit of playing, and you hear already an improvement in the sound at every set of screw tightening. And it keeps you going, and it keeps you motivated, because it's not easy to do this work, 6.5 hours long, sometimes without a break or lunch. So here you can see how screws are placed in one piano. I loosen the bass strings to get access, but in this case they're beautifully placed in between the strings. I'm so grateful. You can see what piano that is by the label behind there, behind the strings. And for the bottom plate screws, yeah, find a way. I have all sorts of short, stubby screwdrivers and bits that work with these big screws for me to work inside. So I have to kneel down and do that. Some pianos are poorly designed.